Hello, fight fans. What a matchup for UFC 241's co-main event. Nate Diaz, the return, versus Showtime, Anthony Pettis. Are you kidding me? UFC 241, of course, Stipe Miocic, Daniel Cormier, maybe the most anticipated heavyweight rematch in the history of the sport. If you want to see my thoughts, the odds, and predictions on that fight, tap the top right-hand corner of the screen at the end of this video. If you like what I do here, please hit that like button like you're beating on a speed bag. Make sure that you subscribe, and don't forget to ring that bell so you're notified whenever I drop a new video or go live, like for this Saturday's Fight Companion, UFC 241. And this is a triple header, absolute madness on all fronts. Three-headed monster coming at you. We already did Stipe versus DC. Let's get into Diaz versus Anthony Pettis. Nate Diaz 19-11. Anthony Pettis 22-8. Neither one of these guys really like going to decisions. Of course, Diaz, he's been away for a minute. Anthony Pettis kind of had, a little bit of back and forth between success, back and forth, wins and losses. But he thinks he's back. I think he's back. Guys, you know what this reminds me of? This is like the boxing version of Gotti versus Ward. You have two guys that come straight forward. They throw a lot of strikes. They get hit a lot. Neither one of them have the best head movement. Neither one of them block a lot. You might say that's not such a good thing, but if you want entertainment, that's what we got with Gotti versus Ward. And a huge volume of strikes and not a whole lot of them defended. You just ended up with a war for the ages, and I think we have a really good chance of getting that kind of thing to happen for MMA this Saturday. Now, of course, a lot of the buzz around this fight from Nate Diaz has not been so much buzz, but smoke. Him smoking what people were calling a joint during one of the open workouts. This was, I believe, Tuesday of fight week. And the internet just exploded. Their CBD company, they sold out from what I could see. Their server was actually shut down from so much traffic. It was insane. And if Diaz was looking to hype this fight, you might say it's kind of a strange way to hype it, but man, did this definitely get attention. And it amazed me how many fans were out there saying, oh, Diaz is going to get kicked out of the fight. He's not going to be able to fight. What an idiot. He's smoking weed right before the fight. He's not that stupid, guys. If you would have watched the whole interview, if you would have watched the interview afterwards, you would have heard him say clearly that it was a CBD cigarette, not any THC, nothing to worry about. It was kind of an endorsement thing. He said it was kind of accidental, even as an endorsement. I don't know if that's the case, but we've heard a little bit more out of Nate Diaz than we have, of course, in a while because he's fighting. He did several interviews coming up to this fight week for ESPN, for Ariel Helwani. It was good to hear him on the mic and have him back in the media. I mean, we need the Diaz brothers, either one of them or both, in the MMA world. They kind of make the world go round in their own little way. Let's listen to a little bit of what Nate Diaz had to say about his opponent before we get into the particulars of this fight and eventually my pick.
Problem not. It's all good with me. I'm just here to fucking kill and stay alive for the weekend.
He seems to think you're jealous of him. Does that make sense to you?
Why am I jealous of him?
Because you got the covers of the weed.
Yeah, no. Yeah, that was blown out of proportion a little bit. But at the time, I was not jealous of him, but I was mad that they were just like Connor is like, you guys are gonna just hand these guys. I did more work than all these guys, and then they're pushing them as the guys. And if you're a fighter and they're pushing this guy as a guy, I'm gonna definitely step up and say, no, fuck that, I'm the guy.
Just
So that's all that was, and he should probably understand that, because that's what everybody in this fight game should be doing. But they know what they're doing. They're like, I want to fight. Who's next? I want to do whatever I'm told. I'm like, from day one. It's gonna stay the same too until I'm 100 years old. I'm the don of all this shit. Anybody gonna step in this room and say they're the ass whipper? I beg to differ.
So there you go, Nate Diaz opening up some, saying, I'm the Don of all this shit. D-O-N, of course, like a Godfather Don. He wasn't the Don the media day for yesterday, though, because Anthony Pettis showed up for media day, and he ended up being all by himself. So when Anthony Pettis showed up, Nate Diaz wasn't there. He did kind of his own interviews things. He's been staying in his own house throughout the week. And I have mixed feelings about this. About Nate Diaz not showing up. He said the UFC allowed him not to show up for this media day. The UFC said, yes, that is correct. Two things about that. From a business standpoint, with the Diaz brothers, I believe less is more. Give people just enough to keep them coming back for more. People feel like a guy like Mike Tyson, feel like he was talking all the time. He really wasn't. He really, kept this wanting more all the time. But when he would get those interviews, when you would sit him down, when he would get that post-fight interview, which a lot of times was only like 45 seconds to a minute, and he got the most out of it. He had you wondering, what is this guy going to say next? So from a business standpoint, I understand that for Nate Diaz. I'm not sure if there was that much thought put into it. But part of your business plan is also you need to win this fight. For the value of your brand, it would be a pretty good idea probably to beat Anthony Pettis on Saturday. And I felt like he missed a great opportunity to get inside Pettis' head. This is a guy that was at the top of the game. He had fell from grace. He's just starting to come back. He himself said that he had lost his confidence. He was getting it back. He was feeling like himself again. Maybe Diaz could have came in if he would have thrown some of that thunder at him like he did at Conor. I'm not sure how Pettis would have reacted to that, and I think there's a good chance that he would have got into Showtime's head a little bit. Let's hear a little bit about what Anthony Pettis had to say at that media day, minus Nate Diaz.
After I beat Gilbert up in Mexico City, after I beat Gilbert up, then when I went to Mexico City, Nate had something to say. I think Serge fought there. And we just had a little back and forth, but Ariel Helwani had a camera on me, and he waited till that happened actually to say something, man. So I was like, all right, this guy has a problem, but I don't know what it is. After watching this unfold, it sounds like he was jealous. Like, honestly, I was waiting to hear what his real problem was, but it just sounds like it's jealousy.
Is this the most personal fight you've had in some time? I can't even remember the last time that you would have had a real personal one.
The last one was Cowboy, when Cowboy was talking. So this time, no, I don't know. It's weird. Like, I started off having it personal and being in my feelings, and now it's just like I'm so confident and ready. Like, I just gotta perform. I'm gonna go out there and just show the world who Showtime is.
One thing you said that interests me a lot yesterday is that this is a different version of you at 170 than even the last one we just saw, which wasn't that long ago. But you needed to come in with sort of a different frame in mind. And this one, you want to be quicker, whereas the last one, you wanted to be bigger. Is that another thing that's sort of fun to be at 170 is that you can kind of fine tune your body to what you're trying to do in the fight?
Exactly, man. And I'm not like killing myself to get there. Like I know at 55, I'm like, I gotta be lean and mean. But then I'm fighting wrestlers, so I'm like, let me get as big as I can and then try to kill myself to make weight. Whereas at 170, it's a natural weight for me. Like, at Wonderboy, I was a little bigger just because of the game plan. I had to stay there. I couldn't veer off to the side and dodge his punches because when kicks come. Diaz not the same thing. Now I can move. I get to mix it up and be on my toes. So it's fun. It's fun to use my body as a machine. And I know I'm a machine, man. Like, when I'm in the gym training at 170, I'm whooping everybody's ass.
All right, so there you go. Some words from Anthony Pettis on what he plans on doing, or how it's going for him at 170. I think it's going very well for him. I think it was a great decision. Let's look at the odds of this fight a little bit, and then we're going to go into the last 5 fights for each guy. Pettis comes in just a slight favorite on this one. Most people were saying that's because Diaz has been out for so long. Remember, by the time these two step into the octagon on Saturday, it will be 3 days from being 3 years since the last time Nate Diaz has had a fight. Now, of course, he's constantly training, he's teaching, he's working with the Gracie brothers, he's been training other fighters, getting ready for their fights. And you heard Anthony Pettis talking about being at 170 here. He can be a little more energetic. He doesn't have to lose that weight. And one of the things that comes to mind for me is Anthony Pettis is an extremely explosive fighter. That takes a lot of energy out of you, especially against a cardio king like Nate Diaz. So I think not losing all that weight beforehand, I think that's really going to serve him well. Let's look at Nate Diaz's record coming into this one, though. Last 5 fights. I do the last 5 fights because it's like if you have to go back 6 fights, I don't feel like anybody's the same fighter they were 6 fights ago. You might not be the same fighter that you were 3 fights ago. I don't think anybody's the same fighter they were 6 fights ago. So I think that's a good number. You see a lot of space in between these fights, of course, for Nate Diaz. He was already only fighting about once a year. Beat Gray Maynard on the Ultimate Fighter finale. That's when he came into the UFC. And it's hard to think, he didn't really have that many fights after that Ultimate Fighter finale. Excuse me, that wasn't when he came into the UFC. That was on the Ultimate Fighter 18 finale. Then he drops one to Rafael dos Anjos 13 months later. Then he doesn't fight for a year. Has an impressive victory over Michael Johnson. Of course, beats Conor McGregor, who's on top of the world. That's who I consider his championship experience. You got Rafael dos Anjos and Conor McGregor. That's Nate Diaz's championship experience, even if they weren't champions at the time. He went down against dos Anjos. Of course, finished McGregor in the first one. A lot of people thought he won the second one, but very close fight. Very good fight, and I feel like if it had been a 3-round fight, though, I really feel like Conor would have won that. I think the 5-round fight really played into favor for Nate Diaz. Now let's go into Pettis' record real quick, and we'll come back to Diaz, of course. 5 fights in a row. He is 3-2 in his last 5. He's got losses to Tony Ferguson, Dustin Poirier. Of course, Tony Ferguson, that battle was an absolute war. I don't think anybody really expected to see Pettis come out the way that he did. It was very impressive, even though he ended up losing because of a really bad cut. And then, Jim Miller. Jim Miller's kind of older in his years. The Michael Chiesa fight, that was a good one. He was able to submit a guy with really, really good takedowns and a guy that was a really big 155er at the time, which may have got the wheels spinning in his head about possibly going up to 170. Of course, his last match, straight down the pipe against Stephen Thompson, knocks him out. I think he does a lot of things good. A lot of good things that are going to give Diaz some trouble. I think he's a harder puncher. He's more explosive. His jiu-jitsu is extremely underrated. Now, Nate Diaz, of course, he's not going to trump Diaz when it comes to the jiu-jitsu. But he's right there. He's submitted a lot of guys in his career. Both these guys have submitted a lot of guys in their careers. Nate Diaz, maybe a lot of people don't think about it, but this is a guy that does not really do good when going to decisions. Doesn't like going to decisions. 16 of his 19 wins are by finish, more by submission than knockout, but he likes to finish his fights. One of the reasons maybe he likes to finish his fights is because his record in fights that go the distance, you see those 11 losses. 8 of them are in fights that go the decision. Nate Diaz just 3-8 when the fight goes the distance. Anthony Pettis, same kind of thing. Finished most of his fights. Just 4 of his wins have came by decision, 18 by finish. He's 4-5 when a fight goes the distance. Let's talk about these guys as being finished. Of course, Nate Diaz, super hard guy to finish. The only guy that ever finished him by strikes was Stephen Thompson. The only guy that ever submitted him, I really don't count this. You want to say 5 fights back, don't count. How about 13 years ago, 2006, Hermes Franca subbed him. I'm really not going to count that. Everybody knows about Diaz's jiu-jitsu. Nobody really talks about Pettis' jiu-jitsu, though. And he has a ton of submissions as well. Of course, he won the championship by submission. He's got some brutal arm bars. He's got some incredible kicks. I talked about that explosiveness, the body kicks, the leg kicks. Let's talk about those leg kicks. Nate Diaz has been very susceptible to those leg kicks. He struggled with it in a fight that he did end up winning, but he still struggled with it against Michael Johnson. He struggled with it against Conor McGregor in the second fight. Going back to that Conor McGregor-Diaz second fight, Conor dominated the first 2 rounds. It wasn't until the third round that Diaz really started getting off. McGregor was landing almost every leg kick. Diaz was already had bad swelling on his legs. Conor had floored him twice with punches. And that's why I say if that was a 3-round fight, I feel like Conor would have won. Maybe Diaz would have came out with a different game plan. I think this is a better fight for Diaz if it's 5 rounds as opposed to 3. But let's talk about Pettis and let's talk about some of those losses. Let's talk about most particularly the loss to Dustin Poirier. I heard a lot of people online saying that Anthony Pettis gives up fights. So I went back and I watched that fight against Dustin Poirier. Just a back and forth war. And of course, Poirier, he'll be fighting for the title soon. I think he's got as good a chance as anybody against Khabib Nurmagomedov. Guy's an absolute animal. And Pettis was right with him until this body triangle. It says submission body triangle. I'm going to argue with you guys. I haven't heard what he said really about the official reason why this fight was stopped. But he pointed to his rib, and I'm watching. There's a moment where Dustin is on top of Pettis, and he bridges up, and all of a sudden he winces from pain. Now, I know a little bit or a lot about possibly this particular injury because I had something very similar happen in a judo match. I was fighting somebody, I was a couple weight classes up, but I was bridging up from a guy that was on top of me. And when I bridged up and I was almost out, I felt this sharp wincing pain. And I just knew I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I didn't tap. I just, I stopped. I kind of winced. And the guy kind of stopped what he was doing. The judge looked down at me and I said, I can't breathe. I can't move. He stopped the fight. I had popped my rib completely out of the cartilage. It wasn't out of the skin, but it was out of the cartilage. It was super painful. It took a really long time to recover from that. So I know that's painful. As far as I know, you cannot fight like that because it was a long time before I could even walk without pain. So I don't consider that Pettis, gave up in that fight. I think that's just what had to happen. And he was definitely doing very well in that fight. It was close to even. Now, Nate Diaz is going to bring a lot of volume out in this. Diaz, he's kind of like my Mickey Ward in this one. come straight forward, go to the body. He's balanced. Ward, he would go down to the body and go down to the head. Diaz, he's got that beautiful boxing and that mixed forte of striking, and he just lets those hands go. Huge volume striking, similar to Max Holloway. And then Anthony Pettis, he's got more explosiveness, like I talked about earlier. He's also got a little more head movement, kind of like a Gotti. Gotti, the reason he won the second 2 fights was from head movement and being elusive, not warring quite so much with Ward, and that played in his favor. Of course, they were all still very, very good fights, as I expect this to be a very good fight. But in a 3-round fight, I think Pettis is going to be too explosive. Like I said, Diaz is always there to be hit. And one of the problems that Pettis has really had in the fights that he's lost is getting taken down. And that was the deal with Dustin Poirier. Poirier had taken him down. A lot of the strikes he had landed were in the ground and pound. Nate Diaz, he does not like to take guys down. These guys both have beautiful jiu-jitsu, but Pettis is probably more likely to go for the takedown, honestly, than Diaz is. He's not a wrestler. He's not going to go in there. He's just going to bang with you back and forth. And I feel like as far as a finish happening in this fight, unless Pettis goes for the takedown and gets caught in something, I think Pettis is more likely to finish this fight at 170 by one shot or by some explosiveness. He's got incredible kicks. He's going to punish those front legs of Nate Diaz. Like I said earlier, Nate Diaz is very susceptible to those front leg kicks. We've seen it in several different fights. Pettis, that's his number one weapon, is those kicks. Man, he's kicking all over the place, to the head, to the body. You're never going to have to worry about the cardio of Nate Diaz. And that's why I said for Nate Diaz, I think this would be much better if this were a 5-round fight. For a 5-round fight, I think he takes Pettis into deep waters. I think he has a really good chance of drowning him. Let's bring up the cuts. Pettis has had a lot of scar tissue recently. He's gotten cut in a lot of different fights. 2 fights, I believe, were stopped basically because of cuts. You could see him bleeding profusely, basically leaking against Poirier, against Ferguson, against Max Holloway. It's been an issue. He said that he thinks that dehydrating down to 155, his face was sunken in, he wasn't able to train as well, and it made him more susceptible to cuts. That makes a lot of sense. That is all true. When you're more dehydrated, you are definitely more susceptible to cuts. He's still going to have a lot of scar tissue, so I imagine Diaz is going to cut him up. I don't think he's going to bleed in the same way that he did against Poirier, though, so I think he's right as far as that. I think he's going to be more energetic. I think 170 makes him more explosive. And, I mean, this could definitely go either way, but if you're going to put a gun to my head, I'm going to go with the odds makers on this one, and I'm going to go slightly for Anthony Pettis. I think he moves to 5-5 in decisions. I think he wins the unanimous decision. I think he wins the first 2 rounds, and then I think Diaz probably starts to warm up and come out in the 3rd round, probably wins the 3rd. Diaz is a bit of a slow starter. That's why I would like to see him in all 5-round fights. But for this one, I got Pettis by unanimous decision, a possible finish. But let me know what you guys think down there in the comments. Give me your thoughts as far as who you think is going to win this fight, how you think it's going to go. Is it going to be by finish? Is somebody going to get the finish? Is it going to go to a decision? I really want to know what you guys think. My last breakdown of the week, Yoel Romero versus Paulo Costa. That's still to come, so keep a lookout for that. Like I said, click in the top right-hand corner of the screen to get my breakdown and preview for Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier. And I will see you guys live this Saturday for UFC 241, 3:30 p.m. Pacific. As always, I love you. I respect you. And I'll see your fine asses later.